time. Last time I looked at the clock, it was 5:30. I am freezing, so I have a sweater on my arms. But we are going to finish this up. We have approximately maybe 20-some pages. So we're going to finish this up. Are you all done arguing in there? Oh, you guys are talking about a guy on TV. Okay. All right. So we're going to back up a little bit. Johnny is now in the town municipal building, town hall building. It says Johnny went up the stairs. Okay. First, let's do this. I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook. And we are reading the rest of Dead Zone. We are at the second half of 27. I call it 27b. And then we're going to read the notes. So, let's start. Since I'm late. Really late. Johnny went up the steps and tried the door. The knob turned easily, and he stepped into the cold entryway and pulled the door shut behind him. Now, oh, my hair is falling down. Yeah, oh well. Now the headache was coming back, pulsing along the steady, thick beat of his heart. He set his case down and massaged his temples with his gloved fingers. There was a sudden low scream. The coat closet door was opening, very slowly, and then suddenly white was falling out of the shadows toward him. Johnny barely had held back a cry. For one moment he thought it was a body falling out of the closet like something from a spook movie. But it was only a heavy cardboard sign that read, "Please have papers in order before appearing for examination." He set it back in place, and then turned to the doorway, giving upon the stairs. The door was now locked. He leaned down to get a better look at it in the dim white glow of the streetlight, and filtered in the one window. It was a spring lock, and he thought he might be able to open it with a coat hanger. He found one in the coat closet and hooked the neck of it into the crack between the door and the jamb. He worked it down to the lock and began to fumble around. His head was throbbing fiercely now. At last he heard the bolt snap. I got the hiccups, sorry. The bolt snapped back as the wire caught it. He pulled the door open. He picked up his attaché case and went through, still holding the coat hanger. He pulled the door closed behind him and heard it lock again. He went up the narrow stairs, which creaked and groaned under his weight. At the top of the stairs there was a short hallway with several doors on either side. He walked down the hall, past the town manager and town selectmen, past tax assessor and men's and osier of the poor and ladies. There was an unmarked door at the end. It was unlocked, and he came out onto the gallery above the rear of the meeting hall, which was spread out below him in a crazy quilt of shadows. He closed the door behind him. Sorry about that. And shivered a little at the soft stir of echoes in the empty hall. His footfalls also echoed back as he walked to the right along the rear gallery, then turned left. Now he was walking along the right-hand side of the hall, about 20 feet above the floor. He stopped at a point above the wood stove and directly across from the podium where Stilson would be standing in about 5.5 hours. He sat down cross-legged. Sorry. Oh, it's got to be the warmth, but it's cold. He sat cross-legged and rested for a while, tried to get in control of the headache with some deep breathing. The wood stove, it's cold, but it's making me yawn, and I don't like it making me yawn. What? Okay, I'll pet you. Jeez. The wood stove wasn't operating, and he felt the cold settling steadily against him, and then into him. Previews of the winding shroud. When he had begun to feel a little better, he thumbed at the catches on the attaché case. Phoebe, come here. Phoebe, come here. Come here. Hey, what are you chewing on? Stop that. You have toys right there and right there. Chew on those. Not my caps. The chaos.
I asked a question. What is it? One of those.
The chaos. Always the chaos. I'm telling you. Always the chaos. When he had begun to feel a little better, he thumbed the catches of the attaché case, and the double click echoed back as his footfalls had done, and this time it was the sound of cocking pistols. Western justice, he thought, for no reason at all. That was what the prosecutor had said when the jury found Claudine Leggett guilty of shooting her lover. She's found out what Western justice means. Johnny looked down into the case and rubbed his eyes. His vision doubled briefly, and then things came together again. He was getting an impression from the very wood he was sitting on. A very old impression. If it had been a photograph, it would have been sepia-toned. There we go. Men standing here and smoking cigars, talking and laughing, and waiting for town meeting to begin. It had been 1920, 1902. There was something ghostly about it that made him feel uneasy. One of them had been talking about the price of whiskey and cleaning his nose with a silver toothpick. Why? And 2 years before, he had poisoned his wife. Johnny shivered. Whatever the impression was, it didn't matter. It was an impression of a man who was long dead now. The rifle gleamed up at him. When men do it in wartime, they give them medals, he thought. He began to assemble the rifle. Each click echoed back, just once, solemnly, the sound of a cocking pistol. He loaded the Remington with 5 bullets. He placed it across his knees and waited. I don't like the yawning. Hi! I am so sorry I'm late. I lost track of time and I was doing videos. I was uploading them on YouTube and I'm late. But that's okay. Y'all are here and that's what matters. He placed the rifle across his knees and waited. Part 3. Dawn came slowly. Johnny dozed a little, but he was too cold now to do more than doze. Thin, sketchy dreams haunted what sleep he did get. It's a curse. I didn't yawn until I started reading, I'm telling you. It's a curse. Yep. He came fully awake at a little past 7, the door below thrown open with a crash, and he had to bite his tongue to keep from crying out. Who's there? It was the custodian. Johnny put his eyes to one of the diamond shapes cut into the balustrade, and saw a burly man who was bundled up in a thick navy pea coat. He was coming up the center aisle with an armload of firewood. He was humming Red River Valley. He dropped the armload of firewood into the wood box with a crash, and then disappeared below Johnny. A second later, he heard the thin, screeching noise of the stove's firebox door being swung open. Johnny suddenly thought of the plume of vapor he was producing every time he exhaled. Suppose the custodian looked up. Would he be able to see that? He tried to slow the rate of his breathing, but that made the headache worse, and his vision doubled alarmingly. Sorry. Now there was a crackle of paper being crumpled, then the scratch of a match, the faint whiff of sulfur in the cold air. The custodian went on humming Red River Valley. and then broke into loud and tuneless song. From this valley, they say, you are going. We will miss your bright eyes and sweet smile. Now a different crackling sound. Fire. That's got it, you sucker, custodian said from directly below Johnny. And then there was the sound of a firebox door being slammed shut again. Johnny pressed both hands over his mouth like a bandage. Suddenly afflicted with suicidal amusement. He saw himself rising up from the floor of the gallery, as thin and white as any self-respecting ghost. He saw himself spreading his arms like wings and his fingers like talons and calling down in hollow tones, "That's got you, you sucker!" He held the laughter behind his hands. His head throbbed like a tomato full of hot, exploding blood. Ugh. His vision jittered and blurred crazily. Suddenly, he wanted very badly to move away from the impression of the man who had been cleaning his nose with a silver toothpick. Why would you use a toothpick? I don't understand. Why a toothpick? But he didn't dare make a sound. Dear Jesus, what if he had to sneeze? Suddenly, with no warning, a terrible wavering shriek filled the hall, drilling into Johnny's ears like thin silver nails, climbing, making his head vibrate. He opened his mouth to scream. It cut off. "Oh, you whore," the custodian said conversationally. Johnny looked through the diamond and saw the custodian standing behind the podium and fiddling with the microphone. The mic cord snaked down to the small portable amp. The custodian went down the few steps from the podium to the floor and pulled the amplifier further from the mic, then fooled with the dials on top of it. He went back to the mic and turned it on again. There was another feedback whine, this one lower, and then tapering away entirely. Johnny pressed his hands tight against his forehead and rubbed them back and forth. The custodian tapped on the mic with his thumb, and the sound filled the big empty room. It sounded like a fist knocking on a coffin lid. Yeah, it does. Then his voice, still tuneless, but now amplified at the point of a monstrosity, a giant's voice, bludgeoning into Johnny's head. From this valley, they say you are going. Okay. Stop it, Johnny wanted to scream. Oh, please stop it. I'm going crazy. Can't you stop it? The singing ended with a loud, amplified snap. And the custodian said in his own voice, "That's got you, whore." He walked out of Johnny's line of sight again. There was a sound of tearing paper and a low popping sound of twine being snapped. Then the custodian reappeared, whistling and holding a large stack of booklets. He began to place them at close intervals along the benches. When he had finished that chore, the custodian buttoned his coat and left the hall. The door slammed hollowly shut behind him. Johnny looked at his watch. It was 7:45. The town hall was warming up a little. He sat and waited. The headache was still very bad, but oddly enough, it was easier to bear than it had ever been before. All he had to do was tell himself that he wouldn't have to bear it for long. Part 4. The door slammed open again, promptly at 9:00, startling him out of a catnap. His hands clapped tightly over the rifle and then relaxed. He put his eye to the diamond-shaped peephole. 4 men this time. One of them was the custodian, the collar of his pea coat turned up against his neck. The other 3 were wearing top coats with suits underneath. Johnny felt his heartbeat quicken. One of them was Sonny Elliman. His hair was cut short now and handsomely styled, but the brilliant green eyes had not changed. "Everything set?" he asked. "Check for yourself," the custodian said. "Don't be offended, Dad," one of the others replied. They were moving to the front of the hall. One of them clicked the amplifier on and then clicked it off again, satisfied. "People round these parts act like he's a bloody emperor," the custodian grumbled. He is, the third man said. Johnny thought he also recognized this fellow from the Trimble rally. Haven't you, haven't you got wise to that yet, Pop? Have you been upstairs? Elliman asked the custodian, and Johnny went cold. Stairway door's locked, the custodian answered. Same as always. I gave her a shake. Johnny silently gave thanks for the spring lock on the door. Ought to check it out, Elliman said. The custodian uttered an exasperated laugh. I don't know about you guys, he said. Who are you expecting? The Phantom of the Opera? Come on, Sonny. The fellow Johnny thought he recognized said, There's nobody up there. We got some time for a coffee if we shag ass down to the restaurant on the corner. That's what it says, restaurant on the corner. He's got an accent. That's not coffee, Sonny said. Fucking mud is all that is. Just run upstairs first to make sure no one's up there, Moochie. We go by the book. Johnny licked his lips and clutched the gun. He looked up and down the narrow gallery. To his right, it ended in a blank wall. To his left, it went back to the suite of offices. In either way, it made no difference. If he moved, they would hear him. The town hall served as a natural amplifier. He was stuck. There were footfalls down below, then the sound of the door being between the hall and the entryway being opened and closed. Johnny waited, frozen and helpless. Just below him, the custodian and the two others were talking, but he heard nothing they said. His head had turned on his neck like some slow engine, and he stared down the length of the gallery, waiting for the fellow Sonny Elliman had called Moochie to appear at the end of it. His bored expression would suddenly turn to shock and incredulity. His mouth would open. Hey, Sonny, there's a guy up here. Now he could hear the muffled sound of Moochie climbing the stairs. He tried to think of anything. Nothing came. They were going to discover him. It was less than a minute away now, and he didn't have any idea of how to stop it from happening. No matter what he did, his one chance was on the verge of being blown. Doors began to open and close, the sound of each drawing closer and less muffled. A drop of sweat spilled from Johnny's forehead and darkened the leg of his jeans. He could remember each door as he came past on his way here. Moochie had checked town manager and town selectman, tax assessor. Now he was opening the doors, men's. Now he was glancing through the office that belonged to the Osier of the Poor. Now the ladies' room. The next door would be the one leading to the galleries. It opened. There was a sound of two footfalls as Moochie approached the railing of the short gallery that ran along the back of the hall. Okay, Sonny, you satisfied? Everything look good? Looks like a fucking dump, Moochie responded, and there was a burst of laughter from below. Well, come on down and let's go for coffee, the third man said. And incredibly, that was it. The door slammed too. The footfalls retreated back down the hall, then down the steps to the first floor. Johnny went limp, and for a moment everything swam away from him into shades of gray. The slam of the entryway door, as they went out for their coffee, brought him partially out of it. Below, the custodian presented his judgment. Bunch of whores. Then he left too, and for the next 20 minutes or so, there was only Johnny. How did they not see him? Part 5. Around 9:30 a.m., the people of Jackson began to file into their town hall. What did I do? Oh, I know what I did. It's bugging me because it's going to fall down. Give me just a second. If I can keep that up there while I'm reading. Sometimes it bugs me. There. That should do now. I hope. This sticks up, but it's not going to fall. We're good. File into their town hall. The first to appear was a trio of old ladies dressed in formal black, chattering together like magpies. Johnny watched them pick seats close to the stove. almost entirely out of the field of his vision, and pick up the booklets that had been left on the seats. The booklets appeared to be filled with glossy pictures of Greg Stilson. "I just love that man," one of the three said. "I've gotten his autograph 3 times, and I'll get it again today. I'll be bound." That was all the talk there was about Greg Stilson. The ladies went on to discuss the impending Old Home Sunday at the Methodist Church. Johnny, almost directly over the stove, went from very cold to very hot. He had taken advantage of the slack tide between the departure of Stilson's security people and the arrival of the first townsfolk, using it to shed both his jacket and his outer shirt. He kept wiping sweat from his face with the handkerchief, and the linen was streaked with blood as well as sweat. His bad eye was kicking up again, and his vision was constantly blurred and reddish. The door below opened. There was a hearty tromp, tromp, tromp of men stamping snow from their packs. And then 4 men in checked woolen jackets came down the aisle and sat in the front row. One of them launched immediately into a Frenchman joke. A young lady of about 23 arrived with her son, who looked about 4. The boy was wearing a blue snowmobile suit with bright yellow markings, and he wanted to know if he could talk into the microphone. "No, dear," the woman said. And then they went down behind the men. Did you say went down or sat down? No, went down. The boy immediately began to kick his feet against the bench in front of him, and one of the men glanced back over his shoulder. "Sean, stop that," she said. "10:15 now." The door was opening and closing with a steady regularity. Men and women of all types and occupations and ages were filling up the hall. There was a drifting hum of conversation, and it was edged with the indefinable sense of anticipation. They weren't here to quiz their duly elected representative. They were waiting for a bona fide star turn in their small community. Boy, Johnny knew that most meet your candidate and meet your representative sessions were attended by a handful of diehards in the nearly empty meeting halls. During the election of 76, a debate between Maine's Bill Cohen and his challenger, Leighton Cooney, had attracted all of 26 people, press aside. The skull sessions were so much window dressing, a self-testimonial to wave when election time came around again. Most could have been held in a middling-sized closet. But by 10 a.m., every seat in the hall had been taken, and there were 20 or 30 standees in the back. Every time the door opened, Johnny's hands tensed down on the rifle, and he was still not positive he could do it, no matter what the stakes. 5 past, 10 past. Johnny began to think Stilson had been held up, or was perhaps not coming at all, and the feeling moved steadily through him and the feeling which moved through him was one of relief. Then the door opened again, and a hearty voice called, "Hey, how you doing, Jackson, New Hampshire?" A startled, pleased murmur. Someone called ecstatically, "Greg, how are you?" "Well, I'm feeling perky," Stilson came right back. "How the heck are you?" The spatter of applause quickly swelled to a roar of approval. "Hey, all right," Greg shouted over it. He moved quickly down the aisle, shaking hands, and toward the podium. Johnny watched him through the loophole. Stilson was wearing a heavy, rawhide coat with a sheepskin collar, and today the hard hat had been replaced with a woolen ski cap with the bright red tassel. He paused at the head of the aisle and waved at the 3 or 4 press in attendance. Flashbulbs popped, and the audience got its second wind, shaking the rafters. And Johnny Smith suddenly knew it was now or never. The feelings he had had about Greg Stilson in the Trimble rally suddenly swept over him again with a certain and terrible clarity. Inside his aching, tortured head, he seemed to hear a dull, wooden sound, two things coming together with terrible force at one single moment. It was perhaps the sound of destiny. It would be too easy to delay, to let Stilson talk and talk, too easy to let him get away, to sit up here with his head in his hands, waiting as the crowd thinned out, waiting as the custodian returned to dismantle the sound system and sweep up the litter, all the time hitting himself that there would be next week in another town. The time was now, undisputedly now, and every human being on earth suddenly had a stake in what happened in this backwater meeting house. That thudding sound in his head, like poles of destiny coming together. Stilson was mounting the steps to the podium. The area behind him was clear. The 3 men in their open top coats were lounging against the far wall. Johnny stood up. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Part 6. There were cramps in his legs from sitting popped with dud firecrackers. Time seemed frozen. The applause went on, and even though the heads were turning, necks were craning, someone screamed through the applause, and still it went on. Someone had screamed because there was a man in the gallery, and the man was holding a rifle, and this was something they had all seen on TV. It was a situation with classic elements that they all recognized. In its own way, it was as American as the wonderful world of Disney. The politician and the man in the high place with the gun. Greg Stilson turned toward him, his thick neck craning, wrinkling into creases, the red puff on the top of his ski cap bobbed. Johnny put the rifle to his shoulder. It seemed to float up there, and he felt that it socketed home next to the joint there. He thought of shooting partridge with his dad as a boy. They had gone deer hunting, but the only time Johnny had ever seen one, he had not been able to pull the trigger. The buck fever had gotten him. It was a secret, as shameful as masturbation, and he had never told anyone. There was another scream. One of the old ladies was clutching her mouth, and Johnny saw there was artificial fruit scattered along the wide brim of her black hat. Faces turned up to him, big white zeros, open mouths, small black zeros. The little boy in the snowmobile suit was pointing. His mother was trying to shield him. Stilson was in the gun sight suddenly, and Johnny remembered to flick off the rifle's safety. Across the way, the men in the top coats were reaching inside their pockets, and Sonny Elliman, his green eyes blazing, was hollering, "Down, Greg, get down." But Stilson stared up into the gallery, and for the second time their eyes locked together in a perfect sort of understanding, and Stilson only ducked at the same instant Johnny fired. The rifle's roar was loud, filling the place, and the slug took away nearly one whole corner of the podium, peeling it back to the bare, bright wood. Splinters flew. One of them struck the microphone, and there was another monstrous whine of feedback that suddenly ended in a guttural, low-key buzzing. Johnny pumped another cartridge into the chamber and fired again. This time the slug punched a hole through the dusty carpeting of the dais. The crowd had started to move, panicky as cattle. They all drove into the center aisle. The people who had been standing at the rear escaped easily, but then the bottleneck of cursing screaming men and women formed in the double doorway. There was popping noises from the other side of the hall, and suddenly part of the galley railing splintered up in front of Johnny's eyes. Something screamed past his ear a second later. Then an invisible finger gave the collar of his shirt a flick. All three of them across the way were holding handguns. Oh, good Lord. All three of them across the way were holding handguns, and because Johnny was up in the gallery, their field of fire was crystal clear. But Johnny doubted if they would have bothered over much about innocent bystanders anyway. One of the trio of old women grabbed Lucci's arm. She was sobbing, trying to ask something. He flung her away and steadied his gun in both hands. There was a stink of gunpowder in the hall now. It had been about 20 seconds since Johnny stood up. Down, down, Greg! Stillson was still standing at the edge of the dais. Crouching slightly, looking up, Johnny brought the rifle down, and for an instant Stillson was dead bang in front sight. Then the pistol slug grooved his neck, knocking him backward, and then his shot went wild into the air. The window across the way dissolved in a tinkling rain of glass. Then screams drifted up from below. Blood poured down and across his shoulder and chest. Oh, you're doing a great job of killing him, he thought hysterically, and pushed back to the railing again. He levered another cartridge into the breech and threw it to his shoulder again. Now Stillson was on the move. He darted down the steps to floor level and then glanced up at Johnny again. Another bullet was by his temple. I'm bleeding like a stuck pig, he thought. Come on, and get this over. The bottleneck at the entry broke, and now people began to pour out. A puff of smoke rose from the barrel of one of the pistols across the way. There was a bang, and the invisible finger that had flicked his collar a few seconds ago now drew a line of fire across the side of Johnny's head. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except taking Stillson. He brought the rifle down again. Make this one count. Stillson moved with good speed for such a big man. The dark-haired young woman Johnny had noticed earlier was about halfway up the center aisle, holding her crying son in her arms, still trying to shield him with her body. And what Stillson did then so dumbfounded Johnny that he almost dropped the rifle altogether. He snatched the boy from his mother's arms, whirled toward the gallery, holding the boy's body in front of him. It was no longer Greg Stillson in the front sight, but a small squirming figure in the filter yellow stripes, tiger stripes, a dark blue snowmobile suit with bright yellow piping. The filter yellow stripes, tiger stripes. Now he knows. Johnny's mouth dropped open. It was Stillson, all right, the tiger. But he was behind the filter now. What does that mean? Johnny screamed. And no answer passed his lips. The mother screamed shrilly then, but Johnny had heard it all somewhere before. Tommy, give him to me. Tommy, give him to me, you bastard. Johnny's head was swelling blackly, expanding like a bladder. Everything was starting to fade. The only brightness left was centered around the notched gun sight. The gun sight now laid directly over the chest of that blue snowmobile suit. Do it, oh, for Christ's sake, you have to do it. He'll get away. And now, perhaps it was only his blurring eyesight that made it seem so. The blue snowmobile suit began to spread, its color washing out to the light robin's egg color of the vision. The dark yellow stripping, until everything began to be lost in it. Behind the filter, yes, he's behind the filter. But what does it mean? Does it mean it's safe, or just that he's behind my reach? What does it Warm fire flashed somewhere below and was gone. Some dim part of Johnny's mind registered it as a flashbulb. Stillson shoved the woman away and backed toward the door, eyes squeezed into calculating pirate slits. He held the squirming boy firmly by the neck and the crotch. Can't. Oh, dear God, forgive me, I can't. 2 more bullets struck him then, one high in the chest, driving him back against the wall and bouncing him off of it. The second to the left side of his midsection, spinning him around into the gallery railing. He was dimly aware that he had lost his rifle. It struck the gallery floor and discharged point blank into the wall. Then his upper thighs crashed into the balustrade and he was falling. The town hall turned over twice before his eyes, and then there was a splintering crash as he struck 2 of the benches, breaking his back and both legs. He opened his mouth to scream, but what came out was a great gush of blood. He lay in the splintered remains of the benches as he struck and thought. The benches he had struck and thought, it's over. I poked out, blew it. Hands were on him, not gentle. They were turning him over. Elliman, Moochie, and the other guy were there. Elliman was the one who had turned him over. Stillson came, moving Moochie aside. Never mind this guy, he said harshly. Find the son of a bitch that took that picture. Smash his camera. Moochie and the other guy left. Somewhere close by, the woman with the dark hair was crying out, "Behind a kid! Hiding behind a kid! And I'll tell everybody!" "Shut her up, Sonny," Stillson said. "Sure," Sonny said, and left Stillson's side. Stillson got down on one knee above Johnny. Do we know each other, fellow?" "No sense lying." "You've had the course." Johnny whispered, "We knew each other." "It was that Trimble rally, wasn't it?" Johnny nodded. Stillson got up abruptly, and with the last bit of his strength, Johnny reached out and grasped his ankle. It was only for a second. Stillson pulled free easily, but it was long enough. Everything had changed. People were drawing near him now, and he saw only feet and legs, no faces. It didn't matter. Everything had changed. He began to cry a little. Touching Stillson this time had been like touching a blank, dead battery, falling tree, empty house, bare shelves, wine bottles ready for candles, fading, going away, the feet and legs around him being misty and indistinct. He heard their voices, the excited gabble of speculation, but not the words. "Hello? Can we go in the kitchen and talk? No. Please? I cannot talk over you."
You can talk over
I cannot read over you because all they're going to hear is you. Please. Thank you. I'm almost done. Gabble of speculation, but not the words. Only the sound of the words, and even that was fading, blurring into a high, sweet, humming sound. He looked over his shoulder, and there was the corridor he had emerged from so long ago. He had come out of that corridor and into this bright, placental place. Only then his mother had been alive, and his father had been there, calling him by name, until he broke through to them. Now it was only time to go back. Now it was right to go back. I did it. Somehow I did it. I don't understand how, but I have. He let himself drift toward the corridor with the dark chrome walls, not knowing if there might be something at the far end of it or not, content to let time show him that. The sweet hum of the voices faded, the misty brightness faded, but he was still, Johnny Smith, intact. Get into the corridor, he thought. All right. He thought that if he could get into the corridor, he would be able to walk. Notes from the Dead Zone. So, now we have First note. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, January 23rd, 1979. Dear Dad, this is a terrible letter to have to write, and I will try to keep it short. When you get it, I guess I will probably be dead. An awful thing has happened to me, and I think now that he may have started a long time before the car accident and the coma. You know about the psychic business, of course, and you may remember Mom swearing on her deathbed that God had meant for it to be this way, that God had something for me to do. She asked me not to run from it, and I promised her that I wouldn't, not meaning it seriously, but wanting her mind to be easy. Now it looks as if she was right, in a funny sort of way. I still don't really believe in God, not in a real being, our being who plans for us and gives us all little jobs to do, like Boy Scouts winning merit badges on the great hike of life, but neither do I believe that all the things that have happened to me are blind chance. In the summer of '76, Dad, I went to a Greg Stilson rally in Trimble, which is in New Hampshire's 3rd District. He was running for the first time then, you may recall. When he was on his way to the speaker's rostrum, he shook a lot of hands, and one of them was mine. This was the part you may find hard to believe, even though you have seen the ability in action. I had one of my flashes, only this one was no flash, Dad. It was a vision, either in the biblical sense or in something very near it. Oddly enough, it wasn't as clear as some of my other insights have been. There was a puzzling blue glow over everything that has never been there before, but it was incredibly powerful. I saw Greg Stilson as President of the United States. How far in the future, I can't say, except that he had lost most of his hair. I would say 14 years, or perhaps 18 at the most. Now my ability is to see and not to interpret. And in this case, my ability to see was impeded by that funny blue filter. But I saw enough. If Stilson becomes president, he's going to worsen in an international situation that is going to be pretty awful to begin with. If Stilson becomes president, he is going to end up participating in full-scale nuclear war. That's 1995. Yeah. I believe that the initial flashpoint of this war is going to be in South Africa. And I also believe that in the short, bloody course of this war, it's going to be just 2 or 3 nations throwing warheads, but maybe as many as 20, plus terrorist groups. Daddy, I know how crazy this must look. It looks crazy to me, but I have no doubts. No urge to look back over my shoulder and try to second guess this thing into something less real and urgent than it is. You never knew, no one did, but I didn't run away from the Chatsworths because of that restaurant fire. I guess I was running away from Greg Stilson and the thing I am supposed to do, like Elijah hiding in his cave or Jonah, who ended up in the fish's belly. I thought I would just wait and see. Wait and see if the preconditions for such a horrible future begin to come into place. I would probably be waiting still. But in the fall of last year, the headaches began to get worse, and there was an incident on the road crew I was working with. I guess Keith Strang, foreman, would remember that. Part 2, excerpt from testimony given before the so-called Stilson Committee, chaired by Senator William Cohen of Maine. The questioner is Mr. Norman D. Verizer. the committee's chief counsel. The witness is Mr. Keith Strang of 1421 Desert Boulevard, Phoenix, Arizona. I have hiccups. Date of testimony, August 17th, 1979. Verizer. And at this time, John Smith was in the employ of the Phoenix Public Works Department, was he not? Strang. Yes, sir, he was. V. This was early December of 1978? Strang. Yes, sir. And did something happen on December 7th that you particularly remember? Something concerning John Smith? Yes, sir, it sure did. Tell the committee about that if you would. And Strang, well, I had to go back to the center motor pool to get 2 40-gallon drums of orange paint. He was lining roads, you understand. Johnny, that's John Smith, was out on Rosemont Avenue on the day you're talking about, putting down new lane markings. When I got back there at approximately 4:15, about 45 minutes before knocking off time, and this fellow Herman Jolin that you've already talked to, he comes up to me and says, "You better check on Johnny, Keith. Something's wrong with Johnny." I tried to talk to him and he acted like he didn't hear. He almost ran me down. "You better get him straight." That's what he said. So I said, "What's wrong with him, Hermie?" And Hermie says, "Check it out for yourself. There's something off whack with that dude." So I drove up the road, and at first everything was all right. And then, wow. And what did you see? Before I saw Johnny, you mean? Yes, that's right. The line he was putting down started to go haywire. Just a little bit at first, a jig here and there, a little bubble. It wasn't perfectly straight, you know. And Johnny had always been the best liner on the whole crew. Then it started to get really bad. It started to go all over the road in big loops and swirls. Some places, it was like he'd gone right around in circles a few times. For about 100 yards, he put the stripe down along the dirt shoulder. And what did you do? I stopped him. That is, eventually I stopped him. I pulled up right beside the line machine and started yelling at him. Must have yelled half a dozen times. It was like he didn't hear. Then he swooped that thing toward me and put a hell of a ding in the side of the car I was driving. Highway department property, too. So I laid on the horn and yelled at him again, and that seemed to get through to him. He threw it in neutral and looked over at me. I asked him what in the name of God he thought he was doing. And what was his response? He said, "Hi." That was all. "Hi, Keith." Like everything was hunky-dory. And your response was? My response was pretty blue. I was mad, and Johnny is just standing there, looking all around and holding on to the side of the liner like he would fall down if he'd let it go. That was when I realized how sick he looked. He was always thin, you know, but now he looked as white as paper, and the side of his mouth was kind of, drawn down. At first, he didn't even seem to get what I was saying. Then he looked around and saw the way the line was all over the road, and he said he was sorry, that he kind of, staggered and put one hand up to his face. So I asked him what was wrong with him, and he said, "Oh, a lot of confused stuff. It didn't mean anything." Cohen. Mr. Strang, the committee is particularly interested in anything Mr. Smith said that might cast a light on this matter. Can you remember what he said? Strang. Well, at first he said there was nothing wrong except that it smelled like rubber tires on fire. And then he said that battery will explode if you try to jump it. And something like, I got potatoes in the chest and both radios are in the sun. So it's all out for the trees. That's the best I can remember. Like I say, it was all confused and crazy. And what happened then? He started to fall down, so I grabbed him by the shoulder and his hand. He had been holding it against the side of his face. It came away, and I saw his right eye was full of blood, and then he passed out. But he said more thing before he passed out, did he not? Yes, sir, he did. And what was that? He said, "We'll worry about Stilson later, Daddy. He's in the dead zone now." Are you sure that's what he said? Yes, sir, I am. I'll never forget it. Part 3. And when I woke up, I was in the small equipment shed at the base of Rosemont Avenue. He said I'd better get to see the doctor right away, and I wasn't to come back to work until I did. I was scared, Dad, but not for the reasons Keith thought, I guess. Anyway, I made an appointment to see a neurologist that Sam Weswick had mentioned to me in a letter he wrote in early November. You see, I had written to Sam telling him that I was afraid to drive the car because I was having some incidents of double vision. Sam wrote back right away and told me to go see Dr. Van. Said he considered the symptoms very alarming, but wouldn't presume to diagnose long distance. I didn't go right away. I guess your mind can screw you over pretty well. And I kept thinking, right up to the incident with the road lining machine, that it was just a phase and I was going through and that it would get better. I guess I just didn't want to think about the alternative.
Salt and pepper. What else do you want in the ham?
Meat tenderizer. Put in a little turmeric.
And we have like onion.
We can put chopped onions in Daddy's. If you guys want chopped onions, just make me some without.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get belly before bed. So, yeah.
I took off whatever meat was soft and then put the rest of it.
Yeah, and if you want to just put in any other things that you might say will be good for a burger, what would you put on it? You know, salt and pepper mostly.
Yeah, I'd really put up like recipe.
You don't have to. I can do it after I read. Okay, I'm almost done.
Alright.
But the road lining incident was too much. I went because I was getting scared, not just for myself, but because of what I knew. So I went to see Dr. Van, and he gave me the tests, and then he laid it out for me. It turned out I didn't have as much time as I thought I had. Didn't have as much time as I thought because, Part 4, excerpt from testimony given before the so-called Stilson Committee, chaired by Senator William Cohen of Maine. The questioner, Mr. Norman D. Verizer, the committee's chief counsel. The witness is Dr. Quentin M. Van of 17 Parkland Drive, Phoenix, Arizona. Date of testimony, August 22nd, 1979. So this is all after the incident okay. After your tests were complete and your diagnosis was complete, you saw John Smith in your office, didn't you? Yes. It was a difficult meeting. Such meetings are always difficult. Can you give us the substance of what passed between you? Yes. Under these unusual circumstances, I believe that the doctor-patient relationship may be waived. I began by pointing out to Smith that he had had a terribly frightening experience. Is that middle one?
Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. He agreed. His right eye was still extremely bloodshot, but it was better. He had ruptured a small capillary, if I may refer to the chart, material deleted and condensed at this point. And after making this explanation to Smith, he asked me for the bottom line. That was his phrase, the bottom line. In a quiet way, he impressed me with his calmness and his courage. And the bottom line was what, Dr. Van? Huh? I thought that would be clear by now. John Smith had an extremely well-developed brain tumor in the parietal lobe. Disorder among spectators. Short recess. Doctor, I'm sorry about this interruption. I'd like to remind the spectators that this committee is in session and that it is an investigatory body, not a freak show. I'll have order, or I'll have the sergeant at arms clear the room. That is quite all right, Mr. Veriser. Thank you, Doctor. Can you tell the committee how Smith took the news? He was calm, extraordinarily calm. I believe that in his heart he had formed his own diagnosis, and that his and mine happened to coincide. He said that he was badly scared, however, and he asked me how long he had to live. And what did you tell him? I said that at that point such a question was meaningless because our options were all still open. I told him he would need an operation. I should point out that at this time I had no knowledge of his coma or his extraordinary, almost miraculous recovery. And what was his response? He said there would be no operation. He was quiet, but very, very firm. No operation. I said that I hoped he would reconsider because to turn such an operation down would be to sign his own death warrant. Did Smith make any response to this? He asked me to give him my best opinion as to how long he would live without such an operation. And did you give him your opinion? I gave him a ballpark estimate, yes. I told him that tumors have extremely erratic growth patterns, and that I have known patients whose tumors had fallen dormant for as long as 2 years, but that such a dormancy was quite rare. I told him that without the operation he might reasonably expect to live from 8 to 20 months. But he still declined the operation, is that right? Yes, that is so. Did something unusual happen to Smith as Smith was leaving? I would say it was extremely unusual. Tell the committee about it, if you would. I touched his shoulder, meaning to restrain him, I suppose. I was unwilling to see the man leave under those circumstances, you understand. But I felt something coming from him when I did. It was a sensation like an electric shock, but it was also an oddly draining, debilitating sensation, as if he were drawing something from me. I will grant you that this is an extremely subjective description, but it comes from a man trained in the art and craft of professional observation. It was not pleasant, I assure you. I drew away from him, and he suggested I call my wife because Strawberry had hurt himself seriously. Strawberry? Yes, that's what he said. My wife's brother. His name is Stanbury Richards. My youngest son always called him Uncle Strawberry when he was very small. That association didn't occur until later, by the way. That evening I suggested to my wife that she call her brother, who lives in the town of Coos Lake, New York. And did she call him? Yes, she did. They had a very nice chat. And was Mr. Richards, your brother-in-law, was he all right? Yes, he was fine. But the following week he fell from a ladder while painting his house and broke his back. Dr. Van, do you believe John Smith saw that happen? Do you believe that he had a precognitive vision concerning your wife's brother? I don't know, but I believe that it may have been so. Thank you, Doctor. May I say one more thing? Of course. If he did have such a curse, yes, I would call it a curse. I hope God will show pity on that man's tortured soul. 5. And I know, Dad, that people are going to say that I did what I am planning to do because of the tumor. But, Daddy, don't believe them. It isn't true. The tumor is only the accident finally catching up with me. The accident which I now believe never stopped happening. The tumor lies in the small area that was injured in the crash, the same area that I now believe was probably bruised when I was a child and took a fall one day while skating on Runaround Pond. That was when I had the first of my flashes. Although, even now, I cannot remember exactly what it was. And I had another just before the accident at the Etsy fair. Ask Sarah about that one. I'm sure she remembers. The tumor lies in that area which I always called the dead zone. And that turned out to be right, didn't it? All too bitterly right. God, destiny, providence, fate, whatever you want to call it, seems to be reaching out with its steady and unarguable hand to put the scales back in balance again. Perhaps I was meant to die in that car crash, or even earlier, that day on the runaround. And I believe that when I've finished what I have to finish, the scales will come completely back into balance again. Daddy, I love you. The worst thing, next to the belief that the gun is the only way out of this terrible deadlock I find myself in, is knowing that I'll be leaving you behind to bear the grief and hate of those who have no reason to believe Stillson is anything but a good and just man. Excerpt from testimony given before the so-called Stillson Committee, chaired by Senator William Cohen of Maine. The questioner, Mr. Albert Renfrew. The committee's deputy counsel. The witness is Dr. Samuel Wezek of 26 Harlow Court, Bangor, Maine. Date of testimony, August 23rd, 1979. Renfrew. We are now approaching the hour of adjournment, Dr. Wezek, and on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you for the last 4 long hours of testimony. You had offered a great deal of light on the situation, Wezek. That is quite all right. I have one final question for you, Dr. Wezek. One which seems to me to be of nearly ultimate importance. It speaks of an issue which John Smith himself raised in a letter to his father, which has been entered into evidence. The question is, no. I beg your pardon? You are preparing to ask me if Johnny's tumor pulled the trigger that day in New Hampshire, are you not? In a matter of speaking, I suppose. The answer is no. Johnny Smith was thinking, reasoning, human being until the end of his life. The letter to his father shows this. His letter to Sarah Hazlett also shows this. He was a man with a terrible, godlike power, perhaps a curse, as my colleague Dr. Van has called it. But he was neither unhinged nor acting upon fantasies caused by cranial pressure, if such a thing is even possible. But isn't it true that Charles Whitman, the so-called Texas Tower sniper, had? Yes, he had a tumor. So did the pilot of the Eastern Airlines airplane that crashed in Florida some years ago. And it was never been suggested that the tumor was a precipitating cause in either case. I would point out to you that other infamous creatures, Richard Speck, the so-called son of Sam, and Adolf Hitler, needed no brain tumors to cause them to act in a homicidal manner. Or Frank Dodd, the murderer Johnny himself uncovered in the town of Castle Rock. However misguided this committee may find Johnny's act to have been, it was the act of a man who was sane, in great mental agony perhaps, but sane. And most of all, don't believe that I did this without the longest and most agonizing reflection. If by killing him, I could be sure that the human race was gaining another 4 years, another 2, even another 8 months in which to think it over, it would be worth it. It's wrong, but it may turn out right. I don't know. But I won't play Hamlet any longer. I know how dangerous Stillson is. Daddy, I love you very much. Believe it. Your son, Johnny. 8. Excerpt from the testimony given before the so-called Stillson Committee, chaired by Senator William Cohen of Maine. The questioner, Mr. Albert Renfrew, committee's deputy counsel. The witness is Mr. Stuart Clausen of the Blackstrap Road in Jackson, New Hampshire. Renfrew. And you say you just happened to grab your camera, Mr. Clausen. Yeah, just as I went out the door. I almost didn't even go that day, even though I like Greg Stilson. Well, I did like him before all of this anyway. The town hall just seemed like a bummer to me, because of your driver's exam. You got it. Flunking that permit test was one colossal bummer. But at the end, I said, what the hell? And I got the picture. Wow, I got it. Picture's going to make me rich, I guess. Just like the flag raising on Iwo Jima. I hope you don't get the idea that the entire thing was staged for your benefit, young man. Oh, no, not at all. I only meant, well, I don't know what I meant. But it happened right in front of me, and I don't know, geez, I was just glad I had my Nikon, that's all. You just snapped the photo when Stilson picked up the child? Matt Robeson? Yes, sir. And this is a blow-up of that photo? That's my picture, yes. And after you took it, what happened? 2 of those men ran after me. They were yelling, give us the camera, kid, drop it. Shit, stuff like that. And you ran? Did I run? Holy God, I guess I ran. They chased me almost all the way to the town garage. One of them almost had me, but he slipped on ice and fell down. Cohen. Young man, I'd like to suggest that you won the most important foot race of your life when you outran those 2 thugs. Thank you, sir. What Stilson did that day? Maybe you had to be there, but holding a kid in front of you, that's pretty low. I bet the people in New Hampshire wouldn't vote for that guy for a dog catcher, not for... Thank you, Mr. Clausen. The witness is excused. Part 9. October again. Sarah had avoided this trip for a very long time. But now the time had come, and it would be put off no longer. She felt that. She had left both children with Mrs. Ablanap. They had house help now, and 2 cars instead of the little red Pinto. Walt's income was scraping near $30,000 a year, and had come by herself to Pownall through the burning blaze of late autumn. Now she put over on the shoulder of the pretty little country road, got out, and crossed to the small cemetery on the other side. A small tarnished plaque on one of the stone posts announced that it was the Birches. It was enclosed by a rambling rock wall, and the grounds were neatly kept. A few faded flags remained from Memorial Day 5 months ago. Soon they would be buried under snow. She walked slowly, not hurrying, the breeze catching the hem of her dark green skirt and fluttering it. Here were generations of Bowdens. Here was the whole family of Mastons. Here, grouped around the large marble memorial, was Pillsbury's going back to 1750. And near the rear wall, she found a relatively new stone, which simply read John Smith. Sarah knelt beside it, hesitated, touched it. She let her fingertips skate thoughtfully over its polished surface. January 23rd, 1979. Dear Sarah, I've just written my father a very important letter, and it took me nearly an hour and a half to work my way through it. I just don't have the energy to repeat the effort. So I'm going to suggest that you call him as soon as you receive this. Go do it now, Sarah, before you read the rest of this. So now, in all probability, you know, I just wanted to tell you that I've been thinking a lot about our date at the Etsy fair just recently. If I had to guess the two things that you remember most about it, I'd guess the run of luck I had on the Wheel of Fortune. Remember the kid who kept saying, "I love to see this guy take a beating," and the mask I wore to fool you. That was supposed to be a big joke, but you got mad and our date damn near went right down the drain. Maybe if it had, I wouldn't be here now, and that taxi driver would still be alive. On the other hand, maybe nothing at all of importance changes in the future, and I would have been handed the same bullet to eat a week or month or a year later. Well, we had our chance, and it came up on one of the house numbers, 00, I guess. But I wanted you to know that I think of you, Sarah. For me, there really hasn't been anyone else, and that night was the best night for us. Part 11. "Hello, Johnny," she murmured. And the wind walked softly through the trees that burned and blazed. A red leaf flipped its way across the bright blue sky, and landed unnoticed in her hair. "I'm here. I finally came." Speaking out loud should have seemed wrong. Speaking to the dead in a graveyard was the act of crazy person, she would have said once. But now emotion surprised her. Emotion of such force and intensity that it caused her throat to ache and her hands to suddenly clap shut. It was all right to speak to him, maybe. After all, it had been 9 years, and this was the end of it. After this, there would be waltz and the children and lots of smiles from one of the chairs behind her husband's speaking podium.
Are you watching anything?
The endless smiles from the background and the occasional feature article in the Sunday supplements. If Walt's political career skyrocketed as he so calmly expected it to do, the future was a little more gray in her hair each year, never going braless because of the sag, becoming more careful about makeup. The future was exercise classes at the YMCA in Bangor, and shopping and taking Denny to the first grade and Janice to the nursery school. We now know the little girl, the second child's name and gender. The future was New Year's Eve parties and funny hats. As her life rolled into the science fiction-y decade of the 1980s, and also into the queer and almost unsuspected state, middle age. She saw no county fairs in her future. The first show, Scalding Tears, began to come. The first slow, scalding tears. "Oh, Johnny," she said, "everything was supposed to be different, wasn't it? It wasn't supposed to end like this." She lowered her head, her throat working painfully, and to no effect. The sobs came anyway, and the bright sunlight broke into prisms of light. The wind, which had seemed so warm and Indian summery, now seemed to chill as February on her wet cheeks. "Not fair!" she cried into the silence of Bowden's and Marstons and Pillsbury's. that dead congregation of listeners who testified to nothing more or less than a life than life is more or less than life is quick and dead is dead. Oh God, not fair. And that was when the hand touched her neck. 12. And that was the best night for us. Although there were still times when it's hard for me to believe there ever was such a year as 1970, an upheaval on the campuses and Nixon was president. No pocket calculators, no home videotape recorders, no Bruce Springsteen or punk rock bands either. And at other times it seems like that time is only a hand's breadth away. That I can almost touch it. That if I could put my arms around you and touch your cheek or the back of your neck, I could carry you away with me into a different future with no pain or darkness or bitter choices. Well, we all do what we can, and it has to be good enough. And if it isn't good enough, it has to do. That you will think of me as well as you can, dear Sarah. All my best, all my love, Johnny. 13. She drew her breath in raggedly, her back straightened, her eyes going wide and round. Johnny? It was gone. Whatever it had been, it was gone. She stood and turned away, and of course there was nothing there. But she could see him standing there, his hands jammed deep into his pockets, that easy crooked grin. That easy crooked grin on his pleasant rather than handsome face, leaning lanky and at ease against the monument or one of the stone gate posts, or maybe just a tree gone red with falling, dying fire. No big deal, Sarah. You still sniffing the wicked cocaine? Nothing there but Johnny. Somewhere near, maybe everywhere. We all do what we can, and it has to be good enough. And if it isn't good enough, it has to do. Nothing is ever lost, Sarah. Nothing that can't be found. Same old Johnny, she whispered, and walked out of the cemetery and crossed the road. She paused for a moment, looking back. The warm October wind gusted strongly, and great shades of light and shadow seemed to pass across the world. The trees rustled secretly. Sarah got in her car and drove away. And Johnny passed away when he fell. I apologize. I get emotional when I read. So yeah. I think The Dead Zone is a good one. I know they made a TV show out of it, which would probably like be him touching somebody and solving crimes or something. I don't know. I never did watch it. But I want to thank you guys for being here with me. Thank you guys for putting up with me. Sorry I was late. But yeah, I am going to go so I can settle my emotions, and I will talk to you guys soon. I think I might take tomorrow, at least tomorrow morning, off so I can adjust myself and decide what we're going to read. But anyway, thank you for being here with me. I really appreciate it. I love y'all. Don't forget to follow if you do. Then you'll know when I am always here. And again, I apologize for being late, but I appreciate you guys being here with me. All right, love you. Thanks. Bye.